This may come as a surprise, but outside of graphic design and 3D art, I actually really love movies. I think a lot of it comes from my dad, who introduced me to a lot of underground films at a really early age, like Star Wars and The Matrix and even Lord of the Rings, believe it or not. With that being said, since I've seen so many movies, I obviously have a few favorites. So I thought it'd be fun to handpick a few and create some 3D posters to really show my appreciation. Also, I get a ton of inspiration from these specific movies, so without them, I probably wouldn't be here, and without me, you wouldn't be sitting there right now. Wrap your little noggin around that. As a quick note, I review almost every movie that I watch on Letterboxd, which is definitely the best social media platform I have personally ever used. It's also a great way to get deep FOMO, fear of missing out, when you see all that your friends are watching a movie together and you're home alone with a carton of ice cream watching The Fellowship of the Ring again, hoping to recapture any kind of sense of childlike wonder you once had. But seriously, Letterboxd is great, and Letterboxd, please sponsor me. All right, let's cut the yapping and move into the first poster of the day. I know, I'm so quirky and cool and unique for having Fantastic Mr. Fox as one of my favorite movies ever. But genuinely, it's one of Wes Anderson's best films, and probably the coolest heist movie that I've ever seen. So, one of the most impactful moments, if not the most impactful moment in the whole film, is when Mr. Fox, who is deathly afraid of wolves, encounters one in the wild. But really, dear viewer, this is more than just a simple fear. As it turns out, and as the critics say here, the wolf represents Mr. Fox's own primal animal within him. Essentially, Mr. Fox is trying to escape his animalistic nature, the rage and the hunger that really hurts the people around him, like his family and friends. Make sense? Makes sense. This specific moment, which I will reenact for you here, represents Mr. Fox coming to terms with that wild and animalistic side, which is weirdly human of him. And I think that's why it's one of my favorite movies as well. He realizes that he's gonna hurt the people around him because that nature within him is part of him. And I think we can all relate to that there's something within us that maybe we don't like, but is what makes us unique and makes us who we are. I'm gonna be floating around the scene here, acting as your guide as we go through the world of Blender, my favorite and free 3D software. First and foremost, I'm gonna start with the sphere and give it a little bit more geometry to really get a vaguely fox-shaped head going. This will act as the foundation for a lot of the hair particle systems that we're gonna work on a little bit later. Since our dear Mr. Fox is an actual real-life model that they used for stop motion, I'm really trying to focus on the hair, how they got it matted and how they got all the little wiry pieces. So I'm really trying to replicate that in my 3D scene. Through all of this though, I think I've gained a lot of appreciation for the artists that create these stop motion characters. I cannot imagine having to place every single individual hair, brush it into place in order to create something that is somewhat lifelike. Once I have a base and a combination of furs that I'm somewhat happy with, I'll go ahead and model his shirt and jacket. I'll make sure those have some good felt and corduroy textures as well. With that, and after a lot longer than the 30 seconds that you saw here, here is the finished Fantastic Mr. Fox 3D model created by William Designs. And I could not be happier with how this little guy came out. It was just fun and inspiring to kind of trust the process. When I first started making this guy, didn't think it was gonna happen, guys. Almost quit there for a little bit. But I pushed through and here he is. And it looks kind of like the movie, you know? Next, I'll spend some time modeling some of the more famous little bitty items from the movie to include in the end result. This includes the star apple, the infamous fox tie, and of course, the cider. Now that that's done, that concludes the 3D portion of our Fantastic Mr. Fox poster. I think it's gonna be pretty incredible, or should I say, pretty fantastic. Now I can bring all these little items, fox and wolf, into Photoshop to start messing around with a storybook style composition. I'm spending a lot of time trying to make each of these items fit in the scene as a whole. Obviously, Mr. Fantastic over here should be front and center, Then I'll form the words of the scene around him, making sure to leave some room for everything else. When creating, I like to try and mess up a composition as much as I can. Where can I break graphic design rules, dirty up certain parts, or even take risks that make no sense in the present moment? Those choices are what can take a boring old movie poster and create something new and personal. So after tweaking and moving things around for way too long, here is the completed Fantastic Mr. Fox poster. I'm honestly super excited and inspired by this poster. It was quite the undertaking, but I think it does such a great job of capturing the magic that Wes Anderson created with Fantastic Mr. Fox. It really is a special film to me, and I know it's a special film to so many other people. So it was cool to kind of step into that world a little bit and put myself in the artist's shoes to see how can I create something that's like this. But yeah, there she blows. The best trilogy ever made, Lord of the Rings stands on a tall, tall, tall pedestal for me. And honestly, I get kind of emotional just talking about it. One thing I specifically love about these movies is the obvious love and care that each and every artist placed into each and every scene. From the acting to the visual effects to the practical effects to even the miniatures, all of it screams quality. And there's a reason that this movie has stood the test of time 20 some odd years later. And I just can't even imagine being a worker on one of these miniature sets and having to make it for years on end for it to only be on screen for maybe a minute and a half. It's just absolutely insane. So I thought it'd be fun to take inspiration from those artists and create my own miniature, but in 3D. I also don't want it to look like it's massive. I want it to almost look like it's very small, like it is a miniature. Specifically, I wanted to make this of our favorite one-eyed goofy little guy, Sauron. I think the world just misunderstood him, to be honest. He definitely doesn't represent pure evil or anything. Also, no, I'm not about to spend days of my life modeling Gollum. He is too attractive for my taste, and I just don't want to make something that's museum-worthy right now. In order to accomplish this, I'm going to be using the orthographic camera in Blender to create a somewhat isometric scene. If you aren't familiar, isometric art basically locks your camera view in order to make the scene appear smaller. I know that's a terrible way of describing it, but I looked up the actual definition and it was way above my pay grade. In order to create the scenery around the tower, I'm taking a lot of inspiration from the movie itself. But first and foremost, in Blender, I'm using a displacement map to get a nice little mountain range that we can kind of work off of. From there, I'll start to add boulders and rocks and other little things that really make the scene come together as a whole. Now comes the fun part, the tower itself. And honestly, this isn't the most complex model in the world, but of course, I'm going to overcomplicate it and make sure that every little detail matches that of the movie. Basically, I'm trying to channel the inner pain and satisfaction all those model makers must have felt all those years ago. We'll also throw in some stone and obsidian textures throughout to make the model really come to life. But now comes the truly fun part, the eye. After sculpting a somewhat eye-shaped blob and pupil, I'll use Blender Kit in order to finalize the textures. I know, I'm cutting corners once again, but why not use the tools at hand? And like I say in every video, don't get mad at me. Get mad at old Melonhead over here. I'm just the guy floating around hoping that you don't see all the mistakes I make, which is the magic of cutting and editing. You'll never know what I did and didn't do. At this point, the overall scene is really starting to come together, but I wanted to overcomplicate it just a wee bit more. So I wanted to add a few tiny little armies at war at the base of the tower. In order to accomplish this, I found a few free models online of a human and orc that I can then scatter within my scene. This is using the scatter add-on, which is actually free within Blender, that allows me to basically take the geometry of one of my models and duplicate it 1,000,000 times without destroying my computer. To finish it all out, I'll add an emission cone coming from the eye, a few volumetric clouds around the scene, and of course that sweet, sweet depth of field in the camera itself. And that, my dear hobbits, is a completed Lord of the Rings render. Lastly, I'll add a few grain effects in Photoshop, a small border, and really keep it naked in terms of words to let the render really speak for itself. Lord of the Rings has such an atmosphere to it, from the sights to the sets to the scenery. Everything about it is so big in nature. So it was fun to take that big thing and push it into such a small package. But yeah, I think the poster turned out pretty epic, if I had to say so myself. But as a love letter to Lord of the Rings, here's a quick stanza that I wrote for your ears. Thank you, Lord of the Rings, for all that you do. Here is my love letter, a poster so cool. In every tale and journey anew, this is my heart, forever with you. If you've made it this far into this little old video of mine and haven't seen Howl's Moving Castle or any other Studio Ghibli movie for that matter, pause the video, go watch every single one of those, and then come back to this. I'll be waiting. Howl's Moving Castle, much like every other Studio Ghibli movie, is a masterclass of artistry and animation. I cannot stress enough how badly I want to jump into this film, sit in the perfectly styled 2D grass while a giant castle walks in front of me. One of the key characters that we're going to be focusing on today is the castle itself, which actually mirrors our resident e-boy, Howl. And a little fun fact for you, the castle was actually made with a combination of 2D and 3D animation assets, which I thought was pretty cool. So to honor that, I'm going to actually be sculpting the full castle in Blender today, which is going to take quite a lot of time. And then with the end result, I kind of want it to look like a trophy or a statue, just to save me a bunch of time and I'll not have to worry about the texturing aspect of it. Now, let's jump into this madness. In order to create this absolute beast, I'm working off of a few reference photos that give me a good idea of the framework that I'm going for. Typically, I would spend time blocking out certain sections, but I need to get this video done in time, and yeah. I'll start with a few wormy dealies to create the chicken legs that somehow hold up the 80 tons of castle above it. My man's definitely skipped leg day. From there, I'll start to model and work on his beefy jaw. And this is where you can really start to see the benefit of working from the camera view instead of moving around the model as a whole, because I am not about to make a perfect 3D model of this castle. I don't have the time nor the patience. So, for lack of a better term, working from the camera view allows me to cut corners in a way. I can move shapes around, I can warp shapes to really get an end result that is going to look good in 2D, but from other angles in 3D, might look kind of bad. Next, I'll add his tongue, weird mechanical face, telescope eyes, and the first turret on top of the castle. And really, at this point, we have a great base to start with. Honestly, I tried to make this model a few times already from a few different angles with a few different reference photos, and I would always give up around this point because it was too hard. But I guess I'm a big boy now and decided to suffer through it, and boy, am I glad I did. Next, in order to really start cooking, I'll start adding a lot of the smaller details to the model to give me a better idea of what the end result may look like. This mainly includes adding rivets to almost every part and piece of this model. I do this by using geometry nodes, which, if you're like me, geometry nodes is that piece of Blender that I kind of keep away, don't really ever touch. But for rivets, it's truly incredible. Basically, I'm using an instance on points node in order to add spheres to all the little parts that I want a rivet to be in. Again, people can probably explain that a little bit better, but it's how I learned, and it makes pretty convincing looking rivets. So I'll also use the Boolean modifier to add little cutouts or even holes for pipes to add even more detail. Then it's just me with my tongue out for some reason, heavily concentrated on adding as many details as possible to this model, like a little balcony here, a brick normal map texture here, making sure that the model looks well and adding as many pipes as possible, adding a smokestack here, adding rivets to literally every piece of this model until I lose my mind and my computer almost blows up. But basically, yeah, that's all I'm doing, and I'm descending into madness very fast. After tedious and honestly pretty fun days of working on this 3D model, I am excited to finally share the finished render. Ladies and gentlemen, here is my 3D version of Howl's Moving Castle. Yeah, this is probably the coolest thing I've ever made. I love the effect of the chrome and red, and it was so rewarding and fun to study how the original Howl's Moving Castle was created. Thank you, Studio Ghibli, for always inspiring all of us. With the render finally wrapped up, the only thing left to do is to slap it onto a magazine cover. But not just any cover. I wanted this to be extra special. So naturally, I went all out, spending way too much time picking my favorite scenes from the movie to include in the end result. I also included layering the title for that oh so crucial depth, and obsessively making sure that every element screamed vintage toy magazine. Because why not pour hours into tiny details no one will probably notice? Finally, we have the completed Howl's Moving Castle 3D poster for you and your family or friends or coworkers or neighbors to enjoy together. You know, as an artist, it can be hard to feel encouraged, inspired, and even motivated. But let me be a testament to you. Instead of comparing yourself to others or wishing that you were better at a certain skill or art form, maybe the key to the inspiration that we so often lack is just appreciating the art around us and looking at it in a way that isn't jealous in nature, but pushes us to be better at what we're good at. So heck, go look at a sunset, go scroll on Instagram for hours on end until you find artists that inspire you, that excite you. Maybe that's the key to all of this we're so often lacking. Because to be honest, I haven't made art that I've enjoyed like these 3 posters in a really long time. And I think it's just because that I slowed down a little bit and looked at different art forms in a way that maybe others haven't before. But what do I know? I'm just a little guy making 3D posters on the internet. So I'm gonna go walk into the sunset and make it look really epic, like it's at the end of a movie, while you guys stew on all that.